Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Dyer, and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, December the 15th. It used to be that the news slowed down mid-December, but that's hardly the case anymore. So we are still plugging away with a strong panel to discuss a lot of what is happening all around us this week. Welcome to Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward, along with Krista Kafer, columnist with the Denver Post, Eric Sondermann, columnist with Colorado Politics and the Colorado Springs and Denver Gazettes, and also Tyrone Glover, civil rights and criminal defense attorney. Thank you all for coming in. College students are wrapping up exams and heading home for much needed breaks. And that's not only a break from schoolwork, but perhaps what's happening on many campuses and conversations about the right to free speech at universities versus the right for students to be safe. Here in Colorado, universities have been issuing statements about where they stand as the fallout lingers following the testimony from presidents of 3 prestigious universities last week, Patty.
Well, as came up in those hearings, context matters, and the context is why were 3 university presidents even called on the carpet before Congress? You've got enough problems dealing with your own university, and Congress presumably has enough problems dealing with its own members, and maybe a few other issues they need to deal with before the new year starts. So the context is important. There's no question free speech is difficult. It might be free, but it is always difficult. You've got issues at the Colorado State Legislature about the Israeli flag, the Palestinian flags being flown on the desks. You have a debate up in Avon right now about whether or not the town should fly the Israeli flag. It's really, really tricky. But why Congress had to jump into this, I don't know.
Krista.
You know, free speech is essential on campus. We know that. The question is, where is the line between free speech and harassment? And the fact is, if you're calling from, the whole from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, you're calling for the removal, either lethally or otherwise, of an entire group of people. That's genocide, right? And I know that our different universities are struggling with making that line. I thought it was interesting that CCU, Colorado Christian University, did a fundraising event for Israel. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. My question is does that university also, and I wasn't at the event, so they might have, show as much compassion for Palestinians and Arab Israelis? If you're going to weigh in, make sure that you understand the complexity of these issues and also compassion for both groups of people. And by both groups, I mean Palestinians and Israelis, not Hamas, obviously. People who target and murder innocent people deserve no compassion. But there are other people that are, in that vicinity that are suffering, and I think that we need to be compassionate for all.
The question around college campuses has been, and not just in this particular context, to use that word again, has been the application of that free speech. And it's too often free speech for me, but not for thee. It's free speech when it favors the accepted narrative or the narrative that the powers that be, particularly in academia, want to promote. I think these 3 college presidents, it was hard to watch them in front of Congress, but these are accomplished people who, should be a little more fluid on their feet than they certainly were in that congressional hearing. Yes, context matters, but occasionally you ought to be able to speak with a certain core moral clarity. It's awfully easy to defend speech that fits your existing worldview. The trick is to defend speech which goes against your existing worldview, and that's in short supply in all circles these days.
Mm-hmm. And now to our attorney, your thoughts, Tyrone.
Well, as it relates to the college professors, I feel like they were prepared as though they were in front of the Supreme Court trying to navigate the nuances of their codes of conduct, when in actuality, this was a congressional inquiry. Right? And as leaders of their university, at a moral level, they should unequivocally and unambiguously condemn hate speech, condemn threats and harassment, and condemn speech that incites violence. Now, in navigating how those are applied, which is what I think they were trying to do, and talking about context, it makes sense, but it wasn't right for the moment. We need to have these robust debates on our college campuses for our students, oftentimes before they go into their relative corners of our society, this is the last time for them to really get together and have these debates and sort of receive this education. So it's just, I think, a shame that in all of this, so much politics and so much score settling and beef settling has really found its way in. But at the end of the day, I agree with all the panelists here. We need to protect the First Amendment, but we need to do it in a way where students are safe and people can be heard.
Okay. A poll came out this week that suggests Colorado may be losing its competitiveness or its mojo, as Patty has said in the past, and that residents here are worried about what awaits in 2024. The top issues on the minds of those surveyed, Krista, are the cost of living, crime and safety, and then the affordability of housing.
I am not shocked by these polling numbers. People are like, why is this carton of milk so expensive? And part of that's inflation, and Congress and the president, particularly the former president and the current president, have a lot of blame there. When you spend a lot of money and print it all up, you're going to get inflation. That's just economics. And then if you put mandates on things at the state or the federal level that artificially raise the cost of goods and services, you're also going to see an increase there. So think about housing, think about health care. Our very own legislature has put health care mandates in place that make insurance more expensive, so much so that someone like myself can no longer afford it. I'm now doing a health care sharing plan because insurance has gotten so expensive. And I think about housing as well. Are there mandates in place that make this more expensive? I really do think some of these issues need to be revisited.
There was any surprise in the poll, they asked people the traditional question that pollsters always ask: do you think the state in this case is going in the right direction, or is it off on the wrong track? If you ask that question nationally these days, the wrong track number is huge. It's been huge for a decade or longer through Democratic administrations and Republican administrations. Colorado, the right track number was 50 to 43. 50 right track, 43 off on the wrong track. Now, that's not an overwhelming number, but it deviates from the national norm, and it is not a bad sign of where the state is at.
Do you think that's because they were saying that of the people who have been here 5 years and less, think everything's awesome, and we have so many new people coming here that they kind of, balanced out people?
I think that's a good point, Kyle. There is a divide, and the poll showed the divide between old-timers, long-timers, et cetera, and newcomers to the state, and there's definitely a division of opinion and different attitudes.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting how, this local poll has been able to shed light on what it seems national polls and national reporters seem to be scratching their head about. We've been seeing articles and reporting about how, the economy is great and inflation has slowed and look at the job numbers. Why aren't Americans feeling this? Why is everyone, not just bullish on our economy? And I think you just have to look at, this local poll. Housing costs are still through the roof. Yes, inflation has slowed, but prices are still really, really high. People don't feel safe. They're looking around their communities and they're concerned about whether we're actually going to be able to solve the homelessness crisis. And you cannot divorce those things from folks' feelings about the economy. So, hopefully, as these polls continue to, I think, reaffirm what we all know, we can get down to some common sense solutions that are not only grassroots up, but top down.
Well, the Colorado Chamber said, after looking at that poll, we have these things, we want the legislature to get busy and to make sure everything stays okay in Colorado.
Well, it's not like we weren't thinking about affordability before.
Right.
There were a few interesting things in here. When you think about it, how optimistic people were who'd moved here in the last 5 years, that actually shows that Colorado is probably doing better than we're thinking because they weren't disappointed by what they found. We have the myth of Colorado that everything's lovely and the environment is great and people are kind, and these people apparently think that's true. And it's always been the case, I think, that people who've lived here the longest are the most disappointed in the direction the state's going because their nostalgia isn't being fed. I also thought it was gratifying that local governments are trusted as opposed to big governments. Journalists could have done better, however.
Next year puts ballots before Coloradans 3 times, the first one being in March with the presidential primary. We will have a lot to decide in this new year, but there are a lot of questions surrounding the people at the top of the ballot right now, Eric.
We have the issue that is still unresolved as of this taping of the Colorado Supreme Court ruling on the case of whether Donald Trump is qualified for the Colorado primary ballot. My neighbor here, Ms. Kafer, has something to do with that case. We have the whole Biden impeachment, which the House of Representatives, very partisan, just authorized. It's a search mission. Basically, what they have authorized is unrestrained search mission to go and find something, and then if they find something, they will act on that. And it continues, as you said in your preface to the show, there's no relief, not even over the holidays, from the political stories. And then come January, it's going to ramp up real quickly. Iowa caucuses, third week of January, New Hampshire, 8 days after that, et cetera. So it will keep us busy.
Tyrone.
And what is the crime that you are investigating, said Congressman Neguse. The over-politicization of this process, and I think even admittedly by Representative Reschenthaler, that this is political, which he very quickly walked back. Just how broad this term of high crimes and misdemeanors, we're just seeing how this is now being weaponized by the conservative side of lawmakers. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I'd like to, and what I'm watching is what's going on in our Supreme Court. Because we do have the Colorado State Supreme Court, we do have a decision that the justices, if we stay on track for when the ballots are finalized, should come down relatively quickly. And it really just, I think, calls to question, just because you can, should you? Should you be bringing these lawsuits, around the state to try to keep former President Trump off of the ballots? Because his polling numbers are really showing that all of these attacks are starting to be viewed as political, and they're just shoring up his support. So I think we're going to see from our Supreme Court likely that I think Trump will be on the ballot here, and that gives, I think, an opportunity, for him to, hopefully lose this thing again fair and square.
Well, to return to the previous topic, another gratifying thing in that poll was that election officials came out very high as trusted, highest category. And they're going to need that because in the next year, you can just imagine we're going to continue seeing those attacks on election officials, just as we did in 2020, just as we did in 2016 when Trump, before he was ever on the ballot, was complaining that Colorado was rigged. So we'll see just how rigged Colorado is when the Colorado Supreme Court comes up with its decision regarding the Democratic henchman next to me, whether or not he's on the ballot. I think he probably will be on the ballot. Will he also be on trial at the same time? That's going to be up to the U.S. Supreme Court if he gets immunity or not. But we are in for a really wild season even before we get to the primaries. And let's see if the Colorado Republican Party can actually field a couple commonsensical candidates.
We should point out the Democratic henchman Patty's referring to is allegedly Krista, although you are not Democratic. Or we think you're not a henchman.
Or a man.
Yeah, I actually prefer henchwoman.
Okay.
It's interesting, these issues kind of come together for me. I was a congressional staffer back when Clinton was impeached. And I remember, I was young, and I remember thinking, if you perjure yourself, you lie, you do these things, you misuse the office, fool around with your intern, it's disgusting, you should get impeached. Well, and it never occurred to me, because we did this, what does that bode for the future? And I think that it kind of weaponized impeachment so that there were impeachment calls for Obama, for George W. Bush. There was that whole stupid Russian collusion thing. How many millions of dollars of taxpayer money went to that? There's always that question of what happens if we don't do something. So what happens if you have a president who loses an election and then pushes a huge lie that he did win the election, foments a mob, that mob attacks the Capitol, in order to stop the certification of votes, in order essentially to stop the democratic process. If we don't do something, whether it's politically prudent, whether it's simply going to galvanize somebody's support among their party, but if we don't do that, What happens the next time around when somebody who has a popular following does that and actually succeeds? We have to apply the Constitution now, because if we don't act, things could be worse.
There is no room at the inn. That is a phrase we hear a lot of this time of year with the story of the Nativity. And here in Colorado, it is tough to find room or shelter or care for all the migrants, and that includes families. And it's been a cold week. And it's not just Denver or metro cities dealing with the influx of migrants. Mountain communities are as well. Tyrone, we've heard Carbondale has said, we can't take any more migrants. The cities are strapped. There are a lot of people saying, oh, I can help, but it's a crisis now.
It's absolutely a crisis. And these folks are fleeing a crisis, and they're fleeing horrors and turmoil in their own countries. What's been really beautiful about all of this is where our cities and our governments have not been able to step up, the people have, right? All power to the people. We've seen these grassroots efforts, whether it's access to language, whether it's access to services, getting kids to school, connecting people with jobs and city resources. What makes a democracy great are the people, and the people here at this grassroots level have really stepped up to help these folks in a beautiful way.
Oh, it's amazing, because right now, and the cities had to change its rules for how long migrants can be housed in shelter in the cold weather. It was going to be, it was 14 days for single people, I think 37 for families. They've extended that now, which is good because it's cold. What are you going to do with kids? But it is extraordinary how much people have been stepping up and always asking, what more can I do? Because the government's strapped right now. And you have the Johnston administration trying to house 1,000 people who are not the migrants. And at the same time, we have 3,000 migrants here that they're already in shelter.
Mm-hmm. It's cold out there. We need to make sure that folks are in from the cold, that they have access to food, to shelter, to medical care. And a lot of these folks are fleeing. They are true refugees, true asylees, people who are fleeing terrible circumstances. And we need to do what we can, both as individuals and as a community, to support them. But I also think it's important that Congress take a look at our border policies, because right now we're letting in pretty much everyone that says they have a credible fear. Some of the people do have a credible fear. They are true refugees fleeing horrible circumstances. And I have friends that are asylees. If they had stayed where they were at, they would have been killed. If they go home, they will be killed. That is the definition of somebody that we have, I believe, a moral and ethical responsibility to take into our communities, to support, to help. They will become part of the fabric of our culture, and they will be Americans one day, and I think that's wonderful. But we also have another group of people that just want to come here to work, and I get that. We've got jobs. They may not be able to get jobs in their native country, but they're coming over the border under false pretense that they are refugees, and that's not fair. And right now, I honestly think it's in Biden's court. The Congress has said, the Republicans have said, we are happy to fund Ukraine, and I'm a big proponent of funding Ukraine, if we can get some of these needed changes here at the border that will prevent those that are not really refugees from coming into our country and allow us to serve those refugees and asylees as we should.
Eric.
I think most of it has been said. Particular shout out to people who are rallying, individual citizens and organizations around the state. There are tons of them. I'll do a particular call out to the Newcomers Fund at the Rose Community Foundation. Happens to be run by a friend of mine, but they're doing good work, as are many other funds and efforts throughout the state. Whatever troubles we have in our country, whatever challenges we have, and we talk about them on a weekly basis and we can all recite them, we should be aware that our country is still a magnet for many, many people, dispossessed people around the world who would do anything to come here, and we're observing that they will do anything to come here by this migration crisis. There's a new migrant to this country from Venezuela, and we all understand what Venezuela is, who's now in Carbondale, Colorado. And if you think Denver's cold, subtract another 15 degrees and you're in Carbondale. This gentleman is living in a car while looking for work, while being willing to clean toilets or do anything to bring a small paycheck. And his quote, translated from Spanish to English, was, "Life is already much better here than in Venezuela, 1,000 times better." When somebody is living in a car and still says that, you get a sense of what the conditions were where they're coming from.
Now is the time of the show when we have our panelists run through what they see as a high and a low of the week. We'll start with something that's a disappointment or a low, Patty, for you.
Well, I have to say, if I were Lauren Boebert, which is hard to even imagine, I would not be partying with George Santos in New York City right now if I really wanted to keep my seat.
Okay, all right.
Maybe she's having a ball. I'm going to give my shame of the week to El Paso Republicans who want to put forth this resolution. They want the state party to vote on it. That would basically say that that Trump would be declared the winner, and that they want all of the other candidates to stand down. So basically, if you haven't been indicted, please stand down and shut down your campaign. We want the guy who's been indicted. Way to really alienate all of those right-leaning people who left the Republican Party, who you could have counted on for votes, who may just sit this one out.
Eric.
Well, those are both good ones. Elizabeth Epps, state representative from Central Denver, a gift that is now continuing to give around this table. We've talked about her temper tantrum during the special legislative session, her complete lack of any decorum and indefensible conduct up in the gallery. Yes, she has her free speech rights, but she does not have the right to completely bring a legislative session to a halt to indulge her own whims. And she still has a committee assignment. Yes, the Speaker of the House, Julie McCluskey, took her off the Judiciary Committee, but she still sits on the State Affairs Committee. If Democrats are going to protest when the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and others go completely bonkers and still have committee assignments, it cuts both ways, and they ought to clean their own house.
Tyrone?
I'd like to highlight a two-part series that came out in the Denver Post about the vicious cycle of our courts' mental health and competency systems. This is something that has been on the radar for a long time and is now, I think, just getting some daylight to the public. But folks, sitting in custody for over a year, not receiving mental health services, seeing a deterioration in their health, their families not really knowing what's going on, and there just being a log jam and a backlog. So hopefully the silver lining in all of this is now that there's some daylight and some awareness, we can get to fixing it. But this is a problem that's existed for years, and we haven't seen progress. We've really only seen it get worse.
And you've talked about it on the show many times.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Patty, something good or something that makes you merry, let's say.
Another thing almost unimaginable, I'm going to congratulate Ayante Anderson, who, although I think his campaign on Black Santas focusing on Cherry Creek is really not the place to go, he will be out on Welton Street on Saturday playing a Black Santa for the kids who've never seen a Santa that looks like them. So good for him.
Okay. Krista.
I'm going to give it to the International Rescue Committee. It's actually an international organization that helps refugees, but they have an operation here in Denver helping folks that have come here from very difficult places get back on their feet and become part of the fabric of our community. Good job,
That
IRC.
is good. That is good. Eric.
As of this week, Colorado has 2 additions to the list of National Historic Landmarks. They're both worthy places. Temple Aaron in Trinidad, Colorado. I learned years and years ago that the first Jewish synagogue in the state of Colorado was in Trinidad. Who would have thunk it? It is a wonderful building. Nice. And Wink's Panorama, which is part of Lincoln Hills, which has an important place in African American history in this state, dating back to when discrimination was rampant and the Ku Klux Klan ran loose in Denver, and there were other horrors and outrages. And this Panorama building is now on the national list, the National Historic Register.
Those are good. Good ones. Yes.
I'll give a shout out to holiday giving, and specifically one that the Westward highlighted. The Colorado Hardcore Toy Jive, a hardcore punk rock concert tomorrow at the Marquee, headlined by Fight Like Hell. I was actually at their last show. My very dear friend Joey Chase is their front man. He's since leaving Fight Like Hell, went to DU Law School, and is now a social justice lawyer, and I call him a dear friend. So Joey, I'll try to be there, but I've got the kids, so sitters are sometimes hard this time of year.
Yeah.
But definitely giving them a shout. This will probably be their, again, last show, but also thank you to the Westford for covering them.
Okay, and for me, my positive is more of a well wish and a go get 'em to the undefeated School of Mines Ore Diggers, who are playing for the Division II National Football Championship tomorrow against also undefeated Harding University. I am wearing these earrings. I just put them on, these football earrings that Krista Kafer made for me to support Mines. They were in the championship last year. They lost. So this, we hope, is the year that they bring the trophy home. And thanks again. That can be in theme this weekend. Krista, she makes jewelry too. And way to go get them this week, panel. Thank you all as well for watching at home. We appreciate it, or listening to the podcast on Spotify. Have a wonderful weekend. I'm Kyle Dyer. I will see you next